G'day friends, it's Andrew here again from Nature's Image Photography, and in this video I'm shooting some waterfalls on the Panasonic Lumix G9. I'll be showing you my entire approach and sharing my camera settings. But before we start, be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and if you really appreciate the time I put into making these videos, well, now you can thank me in the nicest possible way by buying me a coffee. You'll find the link in the description below. So we've just had a pretty substantial wet season on the Sunshine Coast, and I decided to grab the opportunity to visit some of the local waterfalls for the first time in ages. Two of these waterfalls are well known, at least to the locals, and one of them is more of a well-kept secret. In fact, as far as I know, it doesn't even have a name. I'm going to show you some of my favourite photos, but first I want to explain and demonstrate my approach to shooting waterfalls, from picking the weather conditions right through to aperture and shutter speed. One or two of the tips are specific to the G9, but most of this would apply to any camera, so there should be something in here for everybody. Let's start with equipment, and for the record, and as I've already said, I'm shooting on the Panasonic Lumix G9. All the photos and video you're going to see are taken using the Leica Panasonic 12-60mm lens. There'll be a fair bit of slow shutter speed happening, so I'm using a tripod for pretty much everything. And finally, I'm using a circular polarizing filter. If you haven't used a polarizer before, they reduce glare on glossy surfaces. So instead of a lot of silvery reflection on the wet rocks, you get the actual colour of the rock, and the white of the flowing water stands out more effectively. Even the greens of the forest will be richer when you take the glare off the glossy leaves. The filter rotates to increase and decrease the level of polarization, and you can actually see the reflection appear and disappear as you turn the filter while it's on the camera. And to prove the point, I'm showing you two unedited raw photos of the same scene. This first one is unpolarized, the second one was taken using the polarizer. So hopefully that example alone is enough to show you the value of using a polarizing filter. Next we look at the weather, and a big part of any waterfall outing comes to picking the right conditions. Of course it makes sense to go after some rain so there's plenty of water in the waterfall. But what's most important to me is shooting on a cloudy day rather than in sunlight. On a sunny day, the sun shining through the trees creates levels of light and shadow that are hard to deal with. And instead of looking for some miraculous camera settings to solve the contrast problem, I prefer to shoot under clouds when the contrast simply isn't there. On days when there's a bit of both, it can take a bit of patience waiting for the next cloud to go across the sun, but it's worth the wait. These two sets of unedited raw photos include one photo taken while the sun was out, and the other one taken with the sun behind a cloud. I think it's easy to see which one I'd rather be working with. Now onto some camera info, and I'll start with something that applies specifically to the Lumix G9. I found while shooting this project that it was best to disable the constant preview function. Now I know I've praised this feature in other videos because it gives you a very accurate visual preview of how bright or dark your photo will be before you press the button. But it also shows you that preview at the shutter speed you're working with. So when you shoot at slow shutter speeds, the view on the screen is painfully slow, and when you zoom or move the camera, it takes ages for the preview to catch up. This is just a half-second shutter speed, but if you were on a 5-second exposure, it would take 5 seconds for the screen to refresh every time you move the camera. So I turned it off. You can do the same by going into the third part of the menu and select the monitor display heading. Then look for the constant preview setting and switch it off. So now when I'm composing a photo, the screen previews at the normal speed, but it doesn't get brighter and darker as I change my settings. That's fine because shooting in manual mode I can keep an eye on my exposure using the light meter at the bottom of the screen. So it's just like using any other DSLR camera I ever owned before I got my G9. There's another function that I want to switch off, and that's the image stabilizer. It's good practice to turn that off whenever you're using a tripod, because it's designed to eliminate camera shake, and when there is no camera shake, it can actually cause problems. Now I have to be honest and admit that I forgot to do this for a couple of these outings, and that's probably the reason why a few of my photos aren't quite as sharp as I would have wanted. And speaking of camera shake, the final part of my setup is to turn my drive mode to the 2-second delay. I haven't bought any kind of remote system for my G9, and the 2-second delay gets rid of any small amount of camera movement when I press the button to shoot. So that's the setup done, and now it's time to start taking photos. Once I've composed my shot, I like to experiment with the movement effects by trying out different shutter speeds. Shooting in manual mode and with my ISO set to 200, It's just a matter of choosing the shutter speed I want and then changing the aperture to balance the exposure. I don't always shoot with my light meter in the middle, which is the exposure the camera would want me to use if I was shooting in auto. Notice here each time I adjust the shutter speed, I reset the aperture to put the light meter one notch to the left for a slightly darker image. In this demo I started with my aperture wide open and a shutter speed of 1/4 of a second. By the time I finished, my aperture was f/22 and the shutter speed was all the way down to 15 seconds. Notice that when the shutter speed falls to 1 second or slower, noise reduction kicks in automatically, so there can be a bit of wait time between shots unless you want to turn that off. Now, I did all of that for the purpose of demonstration only. I don't usually like to go quite so slow because the water becomes a total mist with no definition at all. But I don't like to go super fast and freeze every drop of water either. I like that with waves crashing on rocks at the beach, but for some reason I don't like it for waterfalls. I tend to prefer a range from about 1/30th of a second down to about 1 second. Of course there are exceptions to that, and it's really about personal preference, so I'm not telling you how it should be done, I'm just showing you how I do it. And now, because nobody wants to sit and watch the noise reduction counting down for 15 seconds, let's go straight to the results. Here's the original raw file of that 15-second exposure, followed by the finished image after some processing in Adobe Camera Raw, and then finally another shot from the same series that I liked better, taken at 1/4 of a second, slow enough to create some motion blur, but fast enough to keep some definition in the flowing water. And that, my friends, is my fairly comprehensive approach to shooting waterfalls. All that remains is to show you more of what I came up with over the last couple of weeks. I put a lot of time into this, so I hope you'll stay right to the end, and before you go, don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. I'm Andrew Goodall, this is Nature's Image Photography, thanks for watching.
you.